Brexit is one of the most divisive political challenges of modern times.
This is the deal that is on the table. This is the best possible deal. It's the only possible deal.
It's a leap in the dark, an ill-defined deal with a never-defined end date.
So who are the main characters taking part in this bewildering psychodrama? And what can we discover about them by examining their body language?
Don't press it yet.
The Prime Minister has been desperately trying to persuade everyone to back her EU deal. More than ever before, we find that she's nodding her head to show her interest and approval. The nodding is relentless. It makes her look like a toy that can't stop bobbing its head up and down.
Right behind you all the way. Thank you very much. Stick to what you're doing. Thank you.
Given her desire to be persuasive, Theresa May's nodding might also be a subtle, unconscious means of getting people to mimic her and therefore to give the impression that they agree with her.
Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
The withdrawal agreement is a leap in the dark.
Very few people have a clue where Jeremy Corbyn stands on Brexit. He's suitably critical of the government, but notice how, by reading from his notes, he's able to avoid making eye contact with the members opposite, while keeping his head down, literally as well as figuratively.
There is precious little new to implement spelt out in either the agreement or the political declaration.
There are several things that politicians do to give the impression that they're tough and dominant.
It keeps us in the EU's regulatory framework forever.
One is using large, expansive gestures.
That means basically that we have failed in our duty to the people to take back control.
Boris Johnson's expressive hand movements often take up a lot of space.
No, I think that Theresa has been on the right line.
Here's one of his dominance gestures, the knuckles display. He's actually presenting the hard, manly features of his hands. It's therefore a disguised threat signal. Boris Johnson loves to make people laugh.
I want to also to congratulate my friend Philip Hammond for predicting that I will never become Prime Minister. Yesterday I saw he said it, which is the first Treasury forecast in a long time, I think, to have a distinct ring of truth. And as
being a source of amusement enables him to generate a feel-good factor, to put people at ease, and to enhance his personal standing in their eyes.
bad boys of Brexit.
We want pies, not lies.
So what about the self-styled bad boys of Brexit?
Happy St. George's Day, everybody.
Nigel Faraj enjoys a good laugh. He likes to come across as approachable and unassuming, someone who wears his little vices with pride.
Well done, have a great day, boys.
Another Brexiteer who's up for a laugh is Aaron Banks. For both these men, laughter provides a way of presenting themselves as playful and upbeat. Recently, however, things have begun to change. As the Brexit day of reckoning draws closer, some of the leavers have started to look a lot more serious. They appear to have abandoned their clown cars in favour of the gravitas train.
You've got Boris Johnson and David Davis, and you've got Dominic Raab and Esther McVeigh, you've got Penny Mordaunt. You have streams of talent within the Conservative Party who would be very capable of leading a proper Brexit.
Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't exactly come across as your macho politician. That's partly because he's got an unusually long neck and a narrow face. He therefore lacks that essentially masculine appearance that psychologists refer to as formidability. One way that Rees-Mogg makes up for this is by speaking slowly.
We all have our own concerns, hopes, fears, view of the world. And we can have empathy with other people's, but we can't be other people's. And you certainly can't be 2, 3, 4, 10 million people's view of the world.
His measured delivery keeps his listeners waiting and discourages them from interrupting, giving the impression that he's very much in control.
As what my right honourable friend says, and what my right honourable friend does no longer match, should I not write to my right honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West?
It's another of the many techniques that people in power use to try and persuade everyone that they deserve to be in charge. When political leaders appear together, It's not always apparent how their negotiations are going, but by looking closely at how they relate to each other, we can often tell who's got the upper hand. When the European chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, met up with David Davis, the then Brexit secretary, their body language soon revealed who was in charge. Barnier, for example, is using more expansive hand gestures. Davis is sporting a big smile, whereas Barnier has a pleasant expression but doesn't smile at all. Because smiling serves as a primitive appeasement signal, this makes Davis look like he's eager to please, while Barnier comes across as dominant and workmanlike.
Et on se rapproche de vous, c'est formidable.
Notice too how Barnier is doing all the talking, reinforcing the impression that he's calling the shots.
And good to see you again, David.
A similar pattern emerges when Michel Barnier meets up with the next Brexit secretary, Dominic Raab. When the two men pose for the cameras, Raab is smiling broadly, whereas Barnier hardly smiles at all. See how Barnier orients his body towards the cameras, making himself look more imposing, while Raab's body faces more towards Barnier, making Barnier look more important. Their patterns of gaze say a lot about their relationship. After the handshake, Barnier addresses the press for just over 2 minutes. While he's speaking, he only glances at Raab twice, amounting to less than 3% of the time. Raab, on the other hand, addresses the press for less than a minute, and during that time he looks at Barnier 6 times, amounting to more than 16% of the time he's talking. Here, glancing at the other person is a way of including them, showing that they are important enough to deserve one's attention. It's linked to what psychologists call visual dominance. Theresa May and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker are meeting in Brussels.
Mrs May, good afternoon. Do you expect you might get a deal?
Their actions seem innocent enough, but let's see what happens when we watch the same event in slow motion. It's a case of May trying to adapt to Juncker rather than the other way round. Even before they've taken up their positions, May is monitoring Juncker's hand in anticipation of the handshake. It's only later that he glances down to see if May is responding. A similar thing happens during the kiss. Juncker takes the initiative, pulling May towards him so that she ends up accommodating to him rather than vice versa. It's Juncker who signals that the photo shoot is over by raising his hand. May appears to be caught off guard because she's still smiling for the cameras when Juncker has already started to leave the scene. Since he's the host, it's Juncker's job to take the initiative and to be responsive. Instead, we repeatedly find him making a move and expecting May to follow, without giving her time to respond or checking to see if she's ready. By behaving in this way, Juncker is subtly asserting himself and reminding everyone that he's top dog.
We have a handshake without microphone.
Compare this with a recent handshake between Theresa May and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Watching in slow motion, we see both leaders check out the position of the other's hand. May smiles and Merkel raises her eyebrows and smiles too. These are all friendly appeasement signals. See how Merkel discreetly pumps May's hand to indicate that the handshake is over, and they both let go at the same time. Tiny, considerate gestures like these show that the two leaders are in sync with each other, that they're on the same page. The characteristic and often unique ways that the Brexit players behave tells us a lot about them as individuals.
Ought to have been a little easier.
One of former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson's famous giveaways is his hair fluff.
That is a total fantasy.
It's an integral feature of his personal brand. He'll ruffle his hair, often making himself look even more disheveled, not out of any need for self-comfort, but because he's hoping to draw attention to himself, or because he's already succeeded in doing so. If Boris does ever exhibit a need for self-comfort, it's probably to be found in his habit of putting his hands in his pockets, something he's inclined to do when he's deciding what he's going to say.
On your second question, which was
There's no doubt that of all the politicians who've been involved with Brexit, Theresa May has had the toughest job. It's therefore hardly surprising to find that there have been several occasions when her composure has slipped and she's unwittingly revealed her real feelings. For example, it's not unusual for Theresa May to produce a micro-momentary fear grimace when she's talking about an emotionally upsetting issue or struggling to explain a complicated idea.
There's been some studies over the years that have showed that in good times, companies are more likely to appoint men to leadership positions, but in times of crisis, they're more likely to appoint women.
Look, I think all I would say is that I look at this as a politician, as a member of parliament, as a prime minister.
Here's a typical sequence. Initially, her facial expression is under control. All of a sudden, the corners of her mouth are pulled down, and moments later, her original facial expression has been hurriedly reinstated. The grimace only lasts for a mere fraction of a second, but during that time, it shows us what she's really feeling. It was Charles Darwin who pointed out that facial expressions consisting of opposite actions have opposite meanings. It follows, therefore, that if lowered eyebrows communicate dominance and threat, then raised eyebrows signal submissiveness and a desire to reassure others. If you watch Michael Gove, you'll notice that he frequently raises his eyebrows when he interacts with people, regardless of whether they're more or less important than him.
First of all, about Lewis Pugh, you know, his achievement today, but obviously there's a message behind it.
Yes.
What's your response to his campaign?
Well, I think Lewis is an inspiration. I think as well as the grit and determination that he showed in swimming the English Channel in 50 days, he's also shown great leadership in making us all aware of the vital importance of the seas around our islands.
This is Gove's method for disarming people, his reflex strategy for showing that he's not a threat. One of former UKIP chief Nigel Farage's giveaways is the so-called tongue show.
I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives.
When he's talking about somebody or something he dislikes, he instinctively presses his tongue out between his lips. This is a regressive gesture of rejection, which owes its origins to the baby's habit of ejecting its mother's breast by sticking out its tongue. The tongue show is entirely unconscious. Farage doesn't have the faintest clue that he's showing his displeasure in this way, nor do the people at whom the gesture is directed. Most politicians are totally unaware of their giveaways. Because these behaviours are produced unconsciously and unwittingly, they often give us a special insight into what individual politicians are really like. How people react when journalists are lying in wait to ambush them with questions tells us a lot about their attitudes to the media and how they want to be seen.
We can ask you
You need to leave.
One response is the push-off. Here, businessman Philip Green makes it patently clear that he wants nothing to do with the media, even to the point of trying to prevent any filming.
You're trying to run me over, Sir Philip? No.
Politicians' responses to doorstepping are usually less dramatic. Watch how Jeremy Corbyn runs the media gauntlet, moving as fast as he can from his front door to his bicycle or the escape vehicle.
Good morning, how nice to see you.
Do you think the Labour Party...
Good morning, how nice to see you. Goodbye.
While simultaneously making sure that none of the waiting journalists are able to catch his eye. By studiously averting his gaze, he's showing them that he's not available. To counteract any impression that he's being rude, Corbyn adopts a half-hearted smile. At the same time, he produces a rapid-fire battery of utterances like "Good morning, nice to see you," and "Goodbye."
Can you fix the relationship, Mr. Corbyn?
Good morning, nice to see you. Goodbye.
Now, these stereotyped remarks might seem polite, but they are merely a pretense at politeness, and a rather grumpy one at that. Their real purpose is to keep up a constant chatter, demonstrating that Corbyn is not listening, while making it virtually impossible for anyone to ask him a question without talking over him. But these aren't the only evasive tricks that Corbyn has up his sleeve. He seems to be equally content for people like his mother-in-law to act as a human shield between himself and the media. Boris Johnson's response to doorstepping is very different.
Morning, Foreign Secretary. Are the government's hands now tied, sir, after last night's concession?
Morning.
There are occasions when he clearly wants to avoid any interaction and where, like Corbyn, he puts up a smokescreen of words to discourage journalists from asking him awkward questions.
Has this killed the no deal? Has this killed the no deal Brexit?
I think it was a mistake to walk to work. It's a beautiful... I wanted a quiet walk to work, that's what I wanted.
The big difference, however,
Diligent man you are.
is that Boris usually does so with a big, beaming smile. But there are also times when Boris seems more intent on buttering up the journalists.
Would you like a cup of tea?
Yeah, sure.
Go on, have a cup of tea.
Thank you.
Notice the welcoming expression on Boris's face, the slightly flared nostrils and that incipient smile, suggesting that he's excited and enjoying the media attention.
I want you to have a cup of tea.
If I have a cup of tea, will you answer my question?
Also the beguiling way he flatters the people present in order to get them on his side.
And you've been incredibly patient and I feel very sorry for you, because I have nothing to say about this matter except obviously tea.
Okay.
Okay, go on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Go on.
It's as if Boris was saying, "I'm so sorry, chaps, I can't answer your questions. How about a tray of sweet talk instead?" Fellow Brexit campaigner Michael Gove is different again. Like Boris, he's happy to engage with the media, but unlike Boris, he responds to the questions that are put to him, or rather, he goes through the motions of doing so.
Will she make the late changes that you want, do you think?
I think the Prime Minister is doing a very good job, and I think it's important that people do give the Prime Minister all the support they can in order to ensure that she concludes a deal that's in the best interests of Britain.
Because if you listen carefully, you'll realise that when Gove does give an answer, it's often to a completely different question to the one he's just been asked.
Would you resign if she doesn't make the late changes that you want?
The Prime Minister has my full support.
We also find Gove flattering the journalist.
I managed to get a lovely evening's sleep, and it's lovely to see you.
He apologises for any discomfort she has to endure.
I'm so sorry you have to walk backwards. I'm so sorry about all this trouble here.
Does she have full support cabinet?
Oh, of course, yes, absolutely.
It's all designed to make him look considerate and to get the journalist and the viewing public on side. Notice those raised eyebrows. It's Gove's signature expression, his way of showing that even though he's an important politician, he is not a threat.
Are you expecting a breakthrough?
Well, we've got a much more progressive policy on agriculture and the environment than the EU at the moment.
It's often at times like these, when politicians are being pursued by the media, that they reveal what kind of person they really are. There are two worlds which are utterly different. One is the sphere of politics, the other that of dance. While politics is scheming, conceited, and often mind-numbingly boring, dance is spontaneous, life-affirming and joyful. Recently, these two worlds have collided with each other. The results, I'm afraid, were not always a pretty picture. It all began on Theresa May's recent visit to Kenya, when a local scout started dancing, and she joined in, doing her best to pick up the beat and to copy the movements. It was the prime ministerial equivalent of dad dancing. The leader's speech at last year's Conservative Party conference was a disaster.
Government, businesses and the public sector working together, we have bounced back. We've created record numbers of jobs.
Bits of the stage collapsed, Theresa May struggled with a hacking cough, and to cap it all, a prankster tried to present her with her P45.
Boris asked me to give...
While our opponents flirt with a foreign policy of neutrality and prepare for a run on the ground.
It was decided that this year's conference was going to be different. It would be positive and uplifting, and the secret weapon would be dancing. When she mounted the stage to the strains of ABBA, we saw May as we'd never seen her before, seemingly relaxed and swaying in time to the music. Here was a rhythmic rebranding of the Prime Minister, a boogieing attempt to distance her from last year's disaster and to present her as undeterred and trendy. Did it work? Not really, partly because her style was so unusual, but also because the whole exercise seemed so comedic and out of character. It looked like the Prime Minister had started a jitterbug craze, because soon afterwards Jean-Claude Juncker was also grooving on stage. His impromptu contribution was actually a mocking reference to Theresa May's antics, and his audience obviously loved it. Jeremy Corbyn likes to encourage everyone to start clapping, but he seems to have less interest in joining in with the crowd once it gets going.
Nice you all to come. Nice you all to come.
Once he does join in, he's able to pick up the beat, but moments later, he'll lose it. While everyone else is clapping in unison, Corbyn looks like he's listening to a completely different tune. Musically, he's not on the same page as those around him. He's out on a limb. Placing the Brexit players under the microscope gives us a much clearer picture of their personal goals and strategies, as well as their foibles and shortcomings. Anything that enhances our understanding of these politicians is to be welcomed, especially in these uncertain and troubling times.